So when will the Attorney General and the Nigerian Prosecution Service start charging people with intending to stir up ethnic hatred online in relation to the protests and the unrest resulting therefrom? In the UK, for instance, dozens of people have been charged to court in relation to posts they are alleged to have made on social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, X, etc., which are deemed to have had the intention of inciting racial hatred. So amid sporadic pockets of violent disorder here in Nigeria that in some cases appear to be ethnically motivated, with opposing groups squaring off against each other online, we ask, how much do situations like this amplify false claims about particular ethnic groups or persons on social media that might incite others against them? To what extent can people who post content online with the intention of stirring ethnic hatred on social media be held legally accountable? How difficult is it to pinpoint the role of social media in facilitating ethnic hatred in Nigeria? Well, for more on this, I'm joined in the studio by the public policy analyst and tech expert, Femi Adeagbo, CEO of Controlled-Adeagbo ICT Consultants, a company that provides expert advisory services for a broad range of ICT genres. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Charles, how are you?
Is it difficult to pinpoint the role of social media in facilitating ethnic bullying and hatred in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, viewers. No, I do not think so. I think social media, if we're frank, has done a lot of good. It's for business, for social networks, you know. But on the other hand, it's magnified and viralized the negative intentions of man as well. So it's been used in that sense to propagate falsehood, at times mischievously, at times very deliberately and dangerously as well. So we've seen social media trigger riots, we've seen it probably even trigger wars without us being aware yet. So it's one of those things that it would be quite jejune to think that, oh, let's just leave it to evolve on its own. No. It can't. It needs a measure of responsibility around it. And in a world where freedom is a cry, if you like, I think a bit of control is needed.
Well, you mentioned some points there. You talked about the fact that it potentially, and you're quite right there, has led to upheavals and you know, possibly even wars and so on. But everybody knows that it's there. But what we're trying to tap into from you as an expert, much more so than we are, is whether that being there, I mean, we know it's there, but its origin and its reach can be hard to identify when you start looking at it in the context of specific things like incitement to hatred and so on and so forth.
Yes, I mean, but you saw what the UK did. I mean, the discussions, like you rightly said, are still going on, but the government has moved on to secure a conviction using another law. Because it's not really that difficult if I read a post that's trying to incite or leverage wrong information to achieve an outcome. At times it's reckless, at times it's deliberate, but there must be responsibility to how you use information, whether offline, online.
Yeah, but
online makes it much more potentially
I understand
dangerous.
What you mean, and you have a very good point there, but I suppose from a legal point of view, beyond the fact that the things we see on social media could be alarming, potentially quite dangerous, from a legal point of view, is there any way that these online calls for ethnic militancy, for example, can be measured in terms of how they might translate into real world violence or hostile action against targeted ethnic groups? Because that's the
Predictive
legal
analytics,
thing, isn't it?
I mean, predictive analytics, for example, would be one way in which you could bring technology to play.
Right.
Which will leverage all sort of algorithms, if you like, to predict, look, if this trend continues at this pace, at this rate, at this breadth, these are the likely outcomes in 1 year, in 2 years.
So if you were called to a court to give evidence, for example, or as an expert witness, you would what would you say?
I think, Charles, we need to look at our laws.
Right.
The Cyber Crime Act of 2015, amended in 2024. We need to look at other incitement laws to actually tease out very, very clear understanding of what we want to do in terms of controlling this, because there's a balance as well. For example, how will it affect journalists who are reporting in good faith? At what point would you put something out there that may not be totally correct, but was done with all the responsibility you could muster, but impacts me and then exposes you to serious liability? I think there are some cases now in Nigeria.
Yeah.
At what point do some incitements against pillars of the society, like the military? We've seen this. Where, I mean, I don't want to relitigate NSAS and all that, but we have seen social media used to really set the citizens against the very people who actually protect them. Because if the military and
but they feel that those people are not protected, which is why they're reacting the way that they are.
Yes, but you and I know that if the military and the police were to take a holiday for 3 days, I suspect you and I may not be here.
True.
Yes, so when we say that, we should also put it in context. So bottom line is, I think the time has come with this our ethnic turmoils and the various fault lines, to actually come up with a comprehensive, compact, easy to understand position on how we moderate incitement online and maybe even offline, but online being the key thing, because that's where a lot of the young ones also live.
Absolutely. I find your analysis absolutely fascinating, because I mean you're basically hitting the nail on the head of what is a critical, very narrow space in one way. Because if you go one way, for example, you're saying essentially that there are, at least you believe and many people believe, that there are legal controls, like you gave the example of the UK, over these sorts of things. But the question is whether those legal measures are sufficient. And then on the other hand, you're also saying that there are lots of legal gray areas. You see what I mean? So for instance, many of these people, they use anonymous accounts, which makes it harder to track them down. I mean, there are, legal gray zones in particular, even offline, around incitement to violence, for example. So if it's not a very concrete threat, for instance, I expect that makes it harder to investigate and prosecute, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that's why we need clarity. When does it become a concrete threat? You'd recall the terrorist episodes in America. I think one bomb was the Boston one.
The Boston, the marathon.
Yes, and Apple refused to allow access to the guy's phone, even though there was the active threat of another bomb.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now, I don't know how you justify that for privacy, because I think security always has to come first, because that concerns me and you.
But that's why it's such a
it's a very narrow area, and that's
area.
where it requires clarity. The laws need to spell it out very clearly. In this sort of instances, maybe they will apply to a court, the security agencies apply to a court. Once they get that court order, all gloves off. because I'm sure there are backdoor entries into all this kind of. You can literally trace or track back an account, because there'll be a parameter, whether it's an email, whether it's a phone number. But do the privacy laws allow you to go over those layers?
And underpinning the point that you're making, again, I said it, very good, very interesting point, is the fact that it's the government's job to protect people and give confidence to them. So in that context, you believe that the administration the government basically should review the wider legislative framework around online safety. Because, for example, I mean, you mentioned the context of the ethnic incitement, hatred and all that, right? I mean, that in itself warrants the government to very publicly, even if for political gain, but certainly it'll reassure the public, to review those laws publicly and publicly ask what more can be done, the way that you're asking it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, because in a tech-driven world, governance has become it's got to become more adaptive, because the variables are changing. So
the technology
so
is
quickly,
galloping ahead.
It's galloping. So, and laws are struggling to catch up. So you have to be very proactive. You have to start thinking about the impact of artificial intelligence. What happens when AI bots are trained and deployed to spread fake ethnic news? Who do you hold? I mean, I tried with my Meta the other day, and it spewed out a lot of lies. And I said, but you are lying. And it said, sorry,
I like it. It says, sorry, I'm a machine.
You caught me
up
there.
Your nose with a rubber
I
hose.
said, I could sue. And it said, I exist in the gray area, in the ethical gray area of the law, because I'm a machine. I said, but I could sue your owners.
That's a pretty smart machine.
Yeah. I mean, we're having. I'll show you the conversation thread. So,
great sense of identity.
What happens when AI is weaponized to spread?
That's a worrying. Worrying.
How do we get in front of that issue? Because even unraveling the source becomes much more.
But you think the
difficult.
Nigerian government is thinking about that? Because you clearly are ahead of a lot of people.
You'd be amazed when you interact with people in the military, in the DSS, and places like that, at their levels of sophistication and awareness.
Yeah, but
they are working on a lot of these things. Yes.
Well, okay, that's the key point.
Yeah, and
because it's not about having a drink with a friend.
No.
Who just raises a concern because he's read a lot of stuff.
They are not unaware, but
it's being incorporated into their policy machinery.
But
is it?
Charles, 70% of the population are young,
right,
and are instinctively against any sort of curtailment or anything they see as curtailment of rights and speech. So it's a delicate balance, because they need to be brought in to understand that they can be victims too of the things.
Well, there needs to be a lot of education.
Yeah, and a lot of engagement, dialogue.
Yeah.
Otherwise you'll be seen as, they want to curtail our rights of free speech. And it could trigger another protest in itself.
Fascinating discussion, but beyond the problem of online ethnic baiting and all the rest of it, I mean, let's look at a topic that you and I have discussed in the past, the issue of subsidy, for example, because I remember back in 2022, you were talking about it and you were advising the Buhari government not to touch it until there was more data. What are your thoughts on that now?
Well, instinctively, probably because I'm in tech, I tend to look
You're
at
a
things
data cruncher.
from do you have the granular data underpinning this decision? And it's never too late. One thing we know for sure now is that consumption has decreased because smuggling has stopped. We know that. Right. But by what quantum? Do we really know how many people use petrol for productive endeavor in the informal sector?
Well, not to interrupt you, but just because we're fast running out of time, the point of the data that you're making is that you can plan the removal of subsidy
better.
better
You can
if
plan,
you have that data. Right.
The outcomes may be the same,
Right.
but you can plan, you can target. I'll give you a very quick example
Right.
before we round off. Let's take textiles. So we import, I think, about $2 billion worth of textiles from China. We import about $500 million, I think, from India, all over the place, yeah? Now, because we're a very fashion-conscious society, we probably have about 1 million tailors in Nigeria who convert these textiles into outfits. So they contribute to GDP. Can anyone sit here and tell you how many tailors are in Nigeria? Or how many liters of PMS? Because they need to have petrol generators to produce. Can anyone really from MBS or anywhere sit down and give a president the granular data? I doubt it. And you could cascade that across many sectors. So whilst the policy owners may sit down there and be told, no sir, this subsidy just has to go, it's costing us too much, does anybody actually know what it's returning to the economy in GDP from the informal sector? Has anybody sat to say vulcanizers, tailors, artisans, how many liters? Can anybody tell you how many 5-liter engine cars are in Nigeria? I mean, the data is probably there.
But it's not being used.
It needs to be
converted into something.
Into real actionable intelligence. So that if a policy owner like a president is saying, I am doing this, they can roll out data to support it.
I remember reading something that you wrote.
And I think we had this conversation in 2022.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember reading something that you wrote, because I mean, you know, you're quite a prolific writer, and you send a lot of things out. Where you said once that you think Nigerian officials are data apathetic.
Yes.
Is that still the way that you feel today?
Yes. I think, and I don't know whether it's only a Nigerian official thing. I think we've just become so stuck in narratives. I mean, I remember discussing this subsidy thing with somebody quite senior about 5 years ago, and he said, leave that data, it doesn't matter, it just has to go. I'm like, but I agree, but don't you think it should rest on some data? Because you may find, and it's not too late now, there may be solutions in differentiated subsidy schemes. Charles, if you have a 5-liter engine car, well, you're damaging the environment more than the Uber driver who has a 1.4-liter Corolla.
So based on
so
that
maybe
data,
I'll charge you something more, and then we use that as a subsidy support fund.
Well, that's being done in abroad.
Maybe we can do subsidy cards for certain bands of the population, because petrol in a country of this size, and if you like, complexity, moves everything around significantly. So when you touch it, it's likely to trigger prices. The delivery biker is going to increase his prices. So it passes it
well,
up.
that's a fairly obvious thing.
Well,
that's probably why they say to you, well, we don't need data to figure that one out.
Well, some would say, somebody said to me, no, they know these things, and that's why they don't want to do a proper study for any president. And they're so powerful because the status quo must be maintained. Maybe it's true, but I still think leaders should call for granular data.
I agree.
You know, I would say, look, I want to know so I can make an informed decision.
Absolutely.
And even now that decision has been made, data can still help to refine, adapt, and shape it going forward, because you may subsidize where you think every country subsidizes.
Right.
We're about number 22 in the world in terms of PMS subsidies, so it's not a unique thing to Nigeria. And the reason we are subsidizing that tailor is because we've not given him constant, affordable electricity.
So the bottom line, because we're pretty much out of time, is that data is absolutely essential.
Critical.
And important for the governments to use to formulate policy and to justify their actions. I want to thank you very much indeed. It's always brilliantly enlightening talking with you. Femi Adeagbo is CEO of Controlled-Adeagbo ICT Consultants. He's also a public policy analyst and clearly a tech expert. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.